Hi, everyone. Welcome to Membrain, a podcast series that will show you the behind the scenes of working in science. Join me exploring this fascinating world of science, from the incredible people to the invaluable tips and tricks. Each episode offers a relaxed yet insightful journey. Let's inspire each other and have some fun along the way. Today, I have two special guests, Alan Goddard and Roslyn Bill. Roslyn is a professor at Aston University, and Alan is the reader in biochemistry at Aston University as well. Both were my PhD supervisors, and I am telling you, they are not your average scientists. They are like the rock stars of biotech and membrane biology, and they are what I describe as the financial wizards of academia. And why do I say this? They are behind some seriously game-changing projects. In the last 3 years, they have arranged more than £12 million for their research at Aston. Actually, during my PhD, I was always surprised because every time we talked about money to pay for a service, to buy new equipment, to attend the conference, both of you, always managed to find the money. And let's be honest, this is very unusual in science. Luckily, today we have the opportunity to talk with Alan and Roslyn about this. Thank you for accepting being here. Would you like to tell us a bit more about what you do and why getting funding in your work is very important?
Okay, I'll go first. So I work on the cell membrane, which is the fragile barrier that surrounds all the cells in your body, all the cells in the universe. For me, it's the most important thing, because without a cell membrane, you don't have life. And what I really like to do is take my fundamental interest in the cell membrane and fuse it with some kind of real-world applications. So I spend a lot of time working with biotechnology companies to try and solve their problems with the cell membranes. We do some drug discovery stuff, we do some drug delivery, we make membrane proteins for a variety of applications. But you might have noticed I said the word membrane about 19 times already. That is the best thing in science, is working on the cell membrane. But my real passion is applying that in some way where either immediately or long term will have a real world impact. And in terms of why is it important to have money, I am far too old and incompetent now to go in the lab and do anything myself. So I have to have people actually good at science to go in the lab and do it. People like Carolina, who is an excellent PhD student and just had her final thesis correction signed off. So Dr. Carolina officially. But obviously people don't like working for free. So you need a way to pay them, but also science is incredibly expensive. So the reagents are horrendously expensive. The equipment costs more than your house. So we need what seem like eye-watering amounts of money to do good science.
When you build a team, you need money to pay for them because, as Alan says, people don't like working for free, and it's probably illegal to do that anyway. We don't want to do it. It's not a good idea. So we need to build teams of people who are motivated. We need to pay their salaries. We also train students. That costs money. And so in order to build the environment that we want to build, we need cash. And that's why we have to go out and find it.
Yeah, well, that's true. And I really appreciate the fact that you do it very well, because it worked very well for my PhD. I was able to do everything in 3 years, which is also very unusual. So that's incredible.
But that's because you have worked hard as well, Carolina. You're a good student. So, you were focused and you had a mission and an objective to achieve, and you really nailed it.
I have a lot of friends that are really good, and I really admire them, and they struggle a lot during their PhD because they didn't have funding, all the equipment are not working, or they couldn't buy any reagents, and that makes your work delayed. You cannot do it as fast as you could.
Yeah, absolutely.
But could you tell us a bit more about this process? So you have an idea of a project, and how it is from having an idea to get the money, how you build this thing.
I think sometimes starting with the idea is actually the wrong way to go. So you can start with an idea. You can say, I've got a really good scientific idea that will give a massive breakthrough. You decide where you're going to apply to have it funded, and each funder has a different remit, so it will fund different things. Like if I want to fund basic biology, I'll go to BBSRC. If I wanted to fund something medical, I'd go to MRC, and you've got to know the difference. So you would come up with the idea and then identify the best funder to fund it. So for example, our current Pathfinder grant is funded by the EU. It's a very speculative, blue skies, high risk, high reward project. If you wrote that to BBSRC, being honest, they'd laugh you out the room. But if you wrote it to the Horizon Pathfinder scheme, which is designed for blue skies, high risk research, they will fund it.
Okay.
And having said starting with the idea is the wrong way, it's not always the wrong way, but sometimes you've got to match to the funder as well. You've got to be flexible in what you do, and you can't go in with your idea and say, for my entire career, I want to work on this amino acid in this protein because I think it's really interesting. If a funding call comes up that says, for example, in my field, we want somebody to come up with a way to treat wastewater using a novel biotechnological process, that isn't necessarily what I want to do for all my research, but I can bend my research that way and write a convincing grant application in that area. And I think my CV lends itself to that because I don't actually have a core research area in my CV. If you look at one of our colleagues, David Poyner, for example, who's a professor of pharmacology in pharmacy, all of his research is on a class of proteins called GPCRs, and within that on a small class called Class B, and he's really not interested in anything else. And he's been massively successful doing that. But my CV is more broad. It's all membrane related, but that lets me leverage that later on and say, oh, you want some new works in this aspect of membrane biology, I've still got a track record there.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, I think Alan's being a little bit modest there. Of course, he has a track record because that's really important. You know, you build expertise in a particular area, and then what you do is you identify where you're going to be able to raise funds. And always in the back of your mind, you'll be thinking, do I need somebody who can do some science in my lab at a postdoctoral level? Am I looking to train PhD students? Do I need some equipment? All those sorts of things. But I think you need to be open. And I think what Alan was describing is what I would call opportunism. Opportunism, I can't even say it. Opportunism. And I don't mean that you just give things a whirl, but scientific opportunism. So you have a general area of expertise, and then you see an opportunity to get funding for that particular area in a particular way that you need. So it might be that there's an equipment call comes up and you're thinking, well, actually, I've got an overall plan that in 5 years' time, I may need to be doing this, and that piece of equipment would really help me get there. So I can see an opportunity now to start to get that equipment in place. So by the time we get it into the lab, we'll need it, we'll be able to have it. So I think you need opportunism, and I think you need an overall plan. You know, where are you heading? What's your long-term vision for your science? How are you going to build this field, make it your own? How are you going to get a great team of people into the lab to help you get there?
Yeah, and going back to Alan, because you mentioned that it's also important to see different funders for different ideas, right?
Yep.
How do we know about the funders? How do we know about these different ones, and what's their expertise? How can it help?
I think it's a standard answer. I think that you search on the internet and find it. To be honest, I think each funder will have a remit, so they'll have a clear page on their funding web page which says these are the broad areas we fund. And then importantly, each call they set out, so each opportunity to apply for money will have something within that remit, but you've got to be really careful you are within that area. So for example, we've got a grant under consideration at the moment for a call which is a cross-council call. So that means it doesn't sit within a traditional disciplinary boundary. So it's not just biology or chemistry, it's the interface. And lots of the grants that went in the first round of that got rejected because they weren't actually at an interface for discipline. We had another grant recently where we applied for something called engineering biology. And engineering biology is actually a broad remit, but we put 3 provisional applications in and only 2 got through because the funder decided that one of them wasn't what they considered to be engineering biology. Okay. So checking exactly what they want before you start even thinking about writing is really important.
Okay.
And also having the right support. Aston University is fantastic in this respect. We've got some amazing support staff, colleagues who can help us with that. So Alan and I both rely on colleagues within our college of study who can help us to find the exact opportunity. A good example for me is I won an ERC advanced grant, and I don't think I'd have applied for that had Paul Nobbs, who is our specialist in that area, really pushed me to do it because he saw an opportunity and convinced me it was the right thing to do. So that's a really good example of somebody understanding the landscape, seeing that what I do fits to that. And I think Paul was also instrumental in the Pathfinder, wasn't he, Alan?
Yeah, so it's working with people whose job it is to understand that none of us are experts in everything. And we've got a number of experts. We've got Paul, we've got Jen Whale in the college.
Jen Whale is fantastic, absolutely.
And they are brilliant at either saying, you can go to them with an idea and say, where would I go with this for funding? Or you can go to them and say, you know, just let me know when there's some interesting calls that come up that you think I might be interested in. And most of the time, to be fair, I say yes. Occasionally, Paul will say, do you want to go for this one and this one at the same time? And you say, it's a bit much work, Paul. And then you do it anyway because Paul's very
And
convincing
Alan's
about
Alan.
it.
He does it. He does things in parallel. He's very successful.
But yeah, it's about identifying that right opportunity. And there's almost no point writing a grant if it doesn't fit the grant pool.
Absolutely.
Because you know it's not going to get funded.
And Jen will get in touch. So Jen Whale is our specialist for UKRI, which is our national funding body. And she'll say, here are some opportunities coming up. And she really understands what needs to happen. You need a track record in a particular area. You'll need a strong CV, therefore. You need to have a really clear way of framing the question that you want to answer. And she understands that, and she can help us with that. So I think it's opportunism. It's about having a clear vision of what your science is and working at Aston University.
Is that clear vision really that easy?
No.
Because when I have ideas, but then I think, how do I make this work?
I
have no idea how to do it.
I think it takes years and years to develop what you think you are as a scientist and what your scientific home is. And I've changed what I do. So in my PhD, in one of my postdocs, I worked exclusively on those GPCRs we were talking about with David Pointer before. But then essentially I decided that it was far too competitive to get funded in that area. There's no more prize winners working in that area. People move far faster than you can move. So I ended up changing the area that I work on to the membranes in biotechnology angle. And that takes time to build that track record. And it's got to be a combination really of, I think, things you're interested in scientifically and things that you consider important and things that are fundable. Like if you let me work on whatever I want to work on, probably nobody wants to fund that because they're not interested. It's my little pet project. You've got to find something at that intersection of what you like and what is fundable.
Yeah, passion is definitely an important part of it because, as you know, having just finished your PhD, you'll have many more failures than successes in the grand scheme of things. So you need the passion to get you through the failures, and that's true in funding as well. So typical success rates are, on the high side would be 20%. You get down to more like 10% success rates in some schemes. So you've got to recognise that you will get more rejection letters than acceptance letters. So another message I think is, make the most of your successes when they come, because they'll definitely come in waves. And what I think Alan and I have found recently is that when you're on a winning streak, you often money follows money, but then there'll be dry patches later on. And we just need to keep going, knowing that the success will come periodically.
Yeah, for example, when I think about this, I would say that probably nowadays you feel more confident every time you apply for funding because you have much more, your CV is much better. You have like a strong background on it. You have expertise and you know how to do it much better and in a more efficient way. But when you started your career, maybe that was a bit more harder. Like you were like in a more gray area. You didn't know how to do it. That's the best way of doing it. Maybe you applied and you were like, maybe this is not good, but you had to do it. And in the beginning, I would say there were more failures than now.
I think there's still more failures now than there are successes. But to start with, I think you never know you're going to get your first grant, right? You write grants, you get rejected, and you think maybe I'll never get a grant. And my very first grant was, I think, £5,000 or something like that. But it ticks the box. It says somebody thinks something I've written on a piece of paper that's come out of my head is fundable. And then you get a bit more confidence based on that. But I think having worked at Aston, what is really powerful is mentoring. So I think, without making it sound like we're too awesome, we've mentored a number of people recently to get really big, over £1 million grants, because we kind of guide them through the process and give them some expertise. And we're on those grants, but they're not our grants by any means. And I think having some track record of people on the grant helps with the idea that you might deliver something in the end of it. But I think if I'd have had somebody when I was at a different university, like I have with Ross now and we have with other people, that really help you shape your grants and shape your ideas, it means you'll move up that trajectory a lot faster. If you're just on your own, sitting, writing a grant in your office and flinging it in, I think your odds of success are way below the 20% average. So you're competing with people who have those big support networks and they're still only at the 20-25% average.
Absolutely. It's interesting. So when I was a postdoc, I spent some time in Sweden. I worked in Gothenburg and I worked for a wonderful man called Stefan Homan. And I remember asking him, why did you become a scientist? And his answer was, because I got my first grant. And that's always stayed with me because, of course, he would have perhaps had a different career had he not got that first grant. And I got my first grant when I was at Aston. It was a big EU grant, and that changed my life. It changed my career, and that's why I am a scientist. And I was really lucky quite early on with a lot of EU money. And that was only really possible for me because I had a network, like Alan says. I had a network through Stefan, through his generosity, meeting other scientists who were much more famous and much more successful than me. But I joined that team And then I was able to start to plough my own furrow a little bit. So I didn't get UKRI funding until relatively late in my career, because I'd spent a lot of time on EU money. So
I think this year might be the first year I've ever had proper UKRI funding. So UKRI is the national funding body in Britain. It's the standard one that everybody would apply to. And I didn't apply to them for a number of years and just solely basically went for EU and industry funding because it's the kind of stuff that was funding my work.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think choosing the funder is really, really important.
And something that I think is curious to me is, was this process, so from first time you had to do this in your life until now, did you have a strategy? Did you search? Did you thought about, or have you thought about, how can I apply to project? How can I write this better? How can I increase the chances to get a project that is funding? Did you do this? Or because you were talking about, there's a lot of mentoring here, but you, at the same time, it's a job that you have to look for right after. You have to try to understand how can you do better, who you should reach next.
I think everybody hates the feedback and the reviews, comments they got on grants generally, because most of the time it has, I'm going to say, critiques and ways to improve it. And generally what you do is you get it and they've given you a raw number that you disagree with, and they've written some things that you think are horrible about your grant, and you kind of throw it in the metaphorical bin for a bit, and then you come back and you read it again and you think, actually, if you're doing it properly, you think actually there are some fair comments in there.
When you stopped weeping or being angry, you look back at those comments and you think, you know what, I've got to take this on the chin. Even if I think what I wrote was clear, but the referees don't, I obviously wasn't clear enough, you know. So I think what Alan's saying is absolutely spot on. You know, you learn from experience. You learn how, and particularly for specific funders, what they are looking for and how to make sure you tell them that they're looking for you. You tell them that they're looking for your science. And
I think you get better at being that reviewer of your own work as well. So when I write a grant draft now, I always say to myself, be more Paul Nobbs. So Paul Nobbs, the grant guru, and whenever he reviews my grants, he'll put a comment like, "This makes no sense to me," or "What is the point of this?" or "Make this clearer." And then, because he's not a scientist, so he doesn't critique it scientifically, he critiques it in the way you're communicating what you're trying to do and the importance of it. And whenever I read my own grants now when it's a draft, I think, is that really making the point I wanted to make? Am I using those words in an effective way? Because every grant you write is limited in space or words. So there's no room for stuff you don't need in there or stuff that doesn't make sense. And it's almost being that your own reviewer, then also having the confidence really to give it to somebody else and saying, honestly, tear this apart and make it better.
And being open to that, absolutely. Alan and I wrote a big grant together. This is the AIM grant, our Aston Institute for Membrain Excellence. It's excellent. And
somebody externally said it's excellent.
Yeah, so it must be true. But what was really interesting, Alan and I did most of the writing together, and we probably spent most of our time on that first page.
I think we spent probably more than a week's worth of effort between us just on one page of writing
the first paragraph of that first page.
So maybe 200 words of a 17-page document, and we spent most of our time crafting that first bit, because if you lose a reviewer in the first paragraph and they don't care about what you're doing,
that's right,
it biases them to just think that everything you've got is rubbish anyway.
Yeah, and you learn that, I think. So another thing that happens as you get more senior is that you tend to serve on grant panels yourself. So you start to see what happens and the mechanics of that. So one of the reasons when you're young to make friends and a network with people who are more senior is that they will have had that experience. So I chair one of the fellowships committees, for example, for UKRI, and I start to understand what it is that funder wants, how to convey that in order to then pass that information on more broadly to the community to encourage people to make high quality applications. Because I think you get to a point where your science is good enough, what you want to do is attractive enough, and then you need to be able to take that next notch up to the next level in order to convince a committee, to convince the reviewers that they want to give you the money to do that. And that first page is so important.
I think if you've never reviewed a grant, it's a bit like going to the bookshop, right? So you choose a broad area you're interested in. So I go to the sci-fi section, and then you look at the back of a few books, and that's like your first paragraph or the abstract that tells you whether you're going to be interested in the book or not. And if that doesn't catch your attention, you've already decided it's rubbish, right? And then you open it and you read a bit of the first page, you see if you like the writing style, you see if you like where the story's going. And again, if you don't like that, you put it back and you don't bother with it. That's a bit like being a grant reviewer. If you don't catch somebody in that first bit and the abstract and tell them why it's important, what you want to do with clarity. What did you say yesterday? Clarity is king. Was that what you were saying?
Clarity is attractive. That's my new catchphrase. But it's true. It's really attractive. Because if somebody, I can't remember who it was now, so apologies. This is not plagiarism. Somebody said once in a workshop I was at, it's your questions are, what do we know in this area? What don't we know? What are the open questions? And therefore, what do we need to know? And I think if you can start to think of your science like that, it's really, really helpful, because, what do we know is what's the state of the art, what's out there that's already published, what do people understand to be true? But what are the open questions? What don't we know about this field? This is where you get some excitement. And if we do answer that question, we do answer those open questions, what will we then know that will help us to understand science better, to be able to impact people better, to be able to make better biotechnological products, for example, and being able to have that clarity so that you can stand up in front of somebody and maybe 3 or 4 minutes just tell them, it's the elevator pitch, isn't it? Can you get the elevator pitch down on a page so that somebody wants to keep reading?
Yeah, it's communication.
It is.
It's very, this reminds me of a lecturer that I had back in Portugal. She was always telling me, like, people are always so busy. They have so many documents to read. If you don't catch the attention, like in the first paragraph, in the first sentence, no one will see the rest, because they are tired.
Or they'll read it and be like, oh, it'll be a slog as opposed to a pleasure. You want to try and make somebody's day a better place.
And that's something interesting, because you have to define your strategy based on who are you going to write to try to apply, so the funder, and what the funder is looking at. How do you know, like, this person or this entity is looking for this and this and this and this information and not other type of information? Or you don't think
you do know. So they'll usually have very clear set of instructions on the website these days. It used to be in paper in the good old days. And they'll tell you exactly what they want to know. So there'll be a set layout usually, or set sections that they want you to complete. But it's within those sections that you need to stand out. You need to get that clarity in there.
They tell you exactly what they want. And I think some funders have reviews that are better at sticking to the remit of what they've asked for than others. I'm not going to name any, but I think the EU are a very good example of ones where they really do follow the funding guidance, and the reviewers will review almost point by point with what they've asked for and have you done this or have you not. And for those of you who've been to university, it's a bit like reading the mark scheme, which I know no students ever do. But if you read what people are looking for and you do it, you're in a really good place. And I think one thing we both do is very much showcase what they're asking for. So if they say, in this section, we want you to cover the state of the art, the open questions, and how you're going to address it. You have a section that says state of the art. You have a section that says open questions. You have a section that says how I'm going to address it. And then when the reviewer's reviewing it, they don't have to use loads of mental energy picking out whether you've done those things. They go state of the art, and you go, yeah, they've answered that. And you can make the reviewer's job really easy for them if you look at the criteria and really tailor your grant or your application to do that. When we wrote our big Research England grant for AIM, that was exactly how we did it. We had essentially copied out all the guidance, put it as comments against things we were doing, and went through and literally checked off every bullet point and highlighted what we'd done. And if we hadn't done it, we went back and worked out how to make it happen.
And that's a good strategy.
It is, and I think it's one that we both follow and have done for a number of years, because actually what we realised in this big Research England grant was that there were as the sections got closer to the end, we probably hadn't been as careful. So in mid drafts, we went and we thought, well, we've spent a lot of time in the first half, because often as a person you'll go back to the beginning and start reading it, and then you tail off a bit. So we then started to focus on the second half and realised that we hadn't answered each of the questions.
There's one section we just scrapped, wasn't there?
Yes.
We had a section, and we went back and were reading it towards the end, and we read it, and we read what they wanted, and we read what we've written. We thought that doesn't even answer the question.
Word salad. That's what it was. It was
text,
nonsense.
It was text we basically got elsewhere in the application we thought was good, and we put it in that section.
Yes.
So we just deleted it and started again.
Because that can be tempting. Sometimes it's effective. It can work in both ways. When you've written a lot of grant proposals, you'll often have quite high quality text that you've used. And sometimes the temptation is just to take that text and then edit it a bit and make it better. That can be good, but actually often it's better to start from scratch, which is more scary, because you have to start filling a blank page with words. But
if you couldn't see them, Ros was doing her 2-finger typing. She does it speed.
It's true. TM. But if you actually write words from scratch, you actually are then answering directly the question rather than trying to trying to make something fit. So again, it's worth thinking about that. But one of the things I think I wanted to emphasize that Alan said is, I think getting lots of feedback, so asking other people to read your proposals is super important. Sometimes you can feel like you're bearing your soul to somebody and they're going to come back and tell you it's rubbish. But actually, if they tell you it's rubbish, you need to know. It's so important just for people to tell you that.
It's better to know now than to wait 6 months and have whoever's reviewed it for the fund to tell you it's rubbish.
Yes.
And you've wasted all that effort.
Yes. Because you need to go into these competitions confidently. You need to know that you couldn't have done any more.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't have experience with that. I never applied for any funding project, but I always try to ask for feedback in everything I do. And I'm always waiting for something negative. When people just say everything is perfect, I'm like, it's not perfect. I know it's not perfect. And if you don't tell me something that I can get better, I probably won't know. I will never find out. And it's going to take me longer to reach that point to be better at that in that aspect. But I would say that probably in applying for these projects might be similar. So first time we do it is going to be bad. More bad, not as good as like after 100 times.
Well, we've got some projects now that we're applying for kind of multiple different types of funding for, and it's far easier to write the third or the fourth grant in a topic because you know the literature, you know ways you've got that successfully phrase the things you're trying to say, and then it's just tailoring it for the funder.
Yeah.
And I was we were at a research away day. It might have been this year or the back end of last year, I can't quite remember, and we had to stand up and talk about what we'd done in the year with our grants. And I said, my biggest thing I've done this year is reuse, recycle, and resubmit. So take the material you've got already, reuse it in other grants, recycle stuff into other grants. And if you weren't successful and you've got a chance to improve it and resubmit it, go for it. Some funders don't let you resubmit, but some do. And if you can, you've already got 95% of the grant written and some referees' comments to make it better. Don't be disheartened by it. Just use that to go again.
Yeah, I'll add another R, resilience. I think this is what you learn as you get older as well, is that you will fail in grant proposals more often than you will succeed. Even the most successful person in the world is going to have had more rejections than acceptances. It's just the way it goes. And I think realizing that you can allow yourself to be sad, and you must, and you know, angry or whatever it is. And then after you've gone through that process, then you realize that actually there is something useful to learn from it. And you become resilient to it and think, right, okay, it wasn't clear enough, or the science wasn't novel or exciting enough. I haven't done a good enough job of communicating that to whoever is going to have been on the decision-making panel. So I'm going to do something about it.
No, yeah, that's true. It's ups and downs, but when we are in the down process, the moments, it's hard to keep resilient sometimes.
So I make sure that I've always got at least 2 grant applications in at any one time, because then if one gets rejected, you've still got another one that's in there that you're waiting on that carries the hope that you might get some funding.
Yes.
And then you put another one in and you kind of just make sure you've always got something in. It's something I learned from Kathy Slack, actually. She said she always liked to have a grant in because then you've always got some activity and you're always waiting on something rather than sitting there with that blank page and having nothing. You've always got something on the go.
Yeah. I also remember a colleague who was at Aston, and she's now gone back to Australia, called Amanda Wood. And she told me that it was really useful to use the anger that you feel when you have been rejected to drive you forward. And before yeah, absolutely. So before I got my ERC grant, I wrote to UKRI twice with a smaller scale idea, and twice they rejected it. And the first time they rejected it, I was really upset. And then I looked at the feedback and thought, okay, well, maybe I can do something about it. So I went straight back in again to the next round with an improved idea that had a slightly different focus. And that was rejected as well. And I thought, I was furious. I thought, something's not right here. So I thought, right, I'm just going to go big. So when Paul Nobbs suggested I went for the ERC, that's what drove me to do that. So anger was very helpful there. It gave me
we
some
have
focus.
to use our emotions.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we are emotional.
They are very
people,
important. Yeah. Yeah, that's completely true. And about what Alan was saying, I just remember our lab meetings, Alan. Every lab meeting, you were applying for grants. You just said, like, I applied for this and this and this.
It's what he does.
And then he get the money.
He does.
He get the money. You get the money. And I was like, what's going on? Because I was used to people saying that getting money in science is really hard, is impossible. There's no project.
It is really hard. But it's also a numbers game. So, when Alan's always got one proposal in at any one time, that means that there's always going to be a chance of him being successful. So, the laws of averages will tell you if you've got 5 proposals in various stages of being reviewed, hopefully at least one of them will be successful.
So in 2013, which was a very odd year, and made the most of my 3 Rs of putting multiple grants in. I think I was involved in 30 external funding applications.
30.
30.
Wow.
And I think they're not all, I haven't got all the results yet, but I think we got 16 of them, which was like a phenomenal year.
More than 50%.
Yeah.
But I was writing grants almost constantly during that year, but I'm very deadline driven. So in like even this January, I think we submitted 4 grants just in January alone on various things.
He was having an easy month.
I had a month off, yeah.
Slacker.
It's slacker month. Yeah, it's my birthday in January. January 25th, my birthday. So
Don't forget.
So I had that day off grant writing.
Yeah.
But I think it is a numbers game to some extent.
It's
got to be quality what you put in. You can't just put in rubbish 60 times and hope you're going to get it funded. But if you put in high quality stuff, it's like Anna Hines.
Yes, I was going to say Anna Hines.
Say what Anna Hines says.
Anna Hines says writing a good grant proposal is like buying your lottery ticket. So you want to get the best lottery ticket you can, the shiniest lottery ticket, and then after that it's out of your hands. And she's absolutely right. I've remembered that too. So having good colleagues is really helpful because it helps you focus your thoughts. But I think another way of phrasing that really is that you have to do what you can do that's in your hands. So in your hands is your idea, the quality of the science you do, how you write and communicate, and you can make that and polish it up to a high sheen and then roll it in glitter. After that, it goes off to a committee and to reviewers that you have no control over. So all you can do is give that grant the very, very best chance to be seen positively by people that you have no control over. So yeah, take control of the bits you can take control of.
So like the Research England grant, which established AIM, I think was genuinely the best grant I've ever been involved in submitting because we polished it for weeks and months because it was such a big opportunity to get £10 million that it doesn't come around every day. But equally, I've been involved in grants I've got funded that I thought were unfundable. Because we flung stuff in because there was an opportunity and we had to go for it. But somebody else loved it and thought it was great and gave us a really good review. So sometimes you can't tell, but I think you can tell the good ones. Yeah. And I think what we've seen really in the last couple of years is that even when we're not getting grants, we're scoring well. So we've got a project for some fellowships that Paul Topham led on, which is currently on a reserve list. We had an EU project last year that wasn't funded, but it was first on the reserve list. So we're getting close, even if we're not getting funded. So there's something about the way we've learned to write grants, which is making us competitive.
It's actually, so when you apply for a project, when you think about a project and you want to have the money, do you think about your strengths? Like, I am good at this, I am good at that. I know there's someone that is better than me in something else. And do you work with that? Do you use that strategy to make the proposal better?
Yeah, I think there's two things on this. There's a group of scientists or research you assemble to write a grant, and that's finding people with the strengths you don't have, but you're synergistic with. So, for example, I've worked over a number of years with a colleague at King's College who does gut models for drug delivery, and I don't work on that, but I've got some techniques that he likes to use and vice versa. So we write some grants together. So it's the people you choose, and building the consortium is really important. There's also the grant writing process itself. So you say what you think you're good at, Roslyn, because yours kind of, you always say to me what you think you're good at, and I don't want to take your words away from you.
I think one of the things I think I'm good at is building a team. Well, you gave me this, didn't you? This is lovely. This is from Carolina. So Carolina gave me this because she calls me the mother. So I think I'm good at building teams and helping people to do their best work. You're making me go red now. I'm blushing. So I think that is really helpful. And then you can allow people to find their particular roles within a team and a grant writing team. So Alan and I think write really well together. We have a very similar style of writing.
Yeah, that's really helpful that you don't have to rewrite it once you've written it to make it sound like it's all written by the same person. The other thing Roz is really good at is taking something that's written and really polishing it. So I don't mind starting and doing a first draft, and I'm quite open to just sending out some words that I put on a piece of paper and say, make it better. And when I've got it to work where I'm quite happy with it, I always send it to Roz and say, like, I sent her an abstract for a recent grant and said, it's all right, but can you just make it better? And she did. And it's working in a team like that too.
Yeah, editing is definitely a skill. Alan is amazing at filling a white blank page with things, really effective. And so I think in getting the concepts down. So I think that finding that as part of a team is really, really helpful.
I think the one thing I'm genuinely really good at is cutting stuff down. So if you send me a document that's 50% too long for the funder, I reckon I can cut most of it out without losing any meaning.
Yes.
And I think that's a big skill.
And that's not just cutting out every other word. and keeping the full
Yeah.
stops. No, he is. He's very good at that.
And I agree with everything you said. Actually, I think that both of you do a great team together, and I think that's important. So you are different people, you have different strengths, and you acknowledge each strength that you have, and you respect that. But sometimes that's hard when we are very different. So to understand each other, and to, because someone thinks, oh, I'm writing this and it has to be like this and this, and the other person has a completely different opinion, so, and doesn't agree, and doesn't, I don't know if this teamwork sometimes can be challenging.
Of course,
I think
yes.
you do it really well. I don't know how I manage, but it's good. It's great.
Well, we have a policy, and I'm going to paraphrase our actual policy because it's a podcast, which is we only work with people that we like. So we only work with people that we get on with scientifically and socially and can work with, and you can be really honest with, and you can have that discussion about why you want to do it like that and why somebody else thinks it might be better like that. But ultimately, somebody has to make the call. And with a grant, there's nearly always one principal investigator whose grant it is, who owns it. And in a way, it's up to them. And somebody, like quite often when I'm writing a grant with a group of people and we've kind of had a discussion about which way to go, and then I've kind of said, well, I'm going to decide in this way. Quite often I put my hand up and say, I've made the call. If it all goes wrong, it's on me, but I've decided that I think we should go this way.
Yeah.
Take responsibility as well.
I think that the point about building a network of people that you like and trust is really important. And it doesn't mean that we all think the same thing. You know, by this, it means that we are open enough to be able to challenge each other. And sometimes, you know, Alan might say, I don't think this is working out. I don't think this is good. And then I'll go, okay, why do you think that? And then we'll have a conversation about it. So I think that second section of the big grant we wrote together, we just realized that we weren't answering the questions.
And I think having those conversations in person is really important. So when we came to that conclusion, I think we were on either sitting next to each other on Teams, reading it together, saying it doesn't work. If you write a comment in a Word document that says this doesn't work, it's a bit rubbish, that's not the same as having a conversation with somebody where you can do the back and forth and explain it. Because quite often we're working unusual hours, right? You know, you open somebody's feedback at 10 o'clock at night and they've written, this is rubbish. And you think, I don't like you anymore, you know, whatever. But having those actual conversations really helps. And it helps you explain and think through what you're doing. And sometimes presenting your idea really helps as well. Because if you can't present it in a clear way with a flow and a narrative, it's probably either not fully formed or it's not a very good idea.
Because, I think it's true, isn't it? You need to be able to extract the feeling of somebody doesn't like my science from somebody doesn't like me. That's true also when you get feedback from grant committees or whatever it might be. And I think being able to see that those things are different, you know, to be open to criticism. You're just not being clear. This isn't clear. I don't understand what you need to do. It doesn't mean I don't like you. It means actually I want to help you. I want to help you be clearer and get to where you need to be.
Yeah, I always prefer to discuss these kind of things in person, because body language is when we realize that, okay, this is a constructive discussion. And sometimes when we read emails, it's like, is the mess. We can analyze that message in a very devastating way, a negative way.
Never have difficult conversations by email, because you can spend hours crafting what you think is clear and kind to somebody, and then you have no control. It's again over this, you know, stuff that's out of your hand. You have no control over how somebody reads or feels about what you've written. So if you've got something to say to somebody that's important, never say it by email. That's my experience.
That's okay.
Apart from if it's a grant. And it's grant that says you got it funded, then I want
That's
to
right. That's when
reread it.
Right.
I never believe it until I've got the email.
Yeah, it's true.
So, like, overall, imagine someone that has been struggling a lot finding money for their research, or someone that is starting their career. What would be like 3 or 5 bullet points as advice that you have for them?
Okay, pick your strongest idea that you really believe is world changing, what you can achieve from it. So don't pick something that's incremental. Pick something that's a really big thing that you think is really important, that you genuinely believe in. If you don't believe in what you're writing about, that'll come across on the page. So ideally something that you're an expert or a relative expert in. Work with experts to find a funding body that might well fund it, and then write something on a virtual piece of paper. So many people stall at that I've got an idea stage, and they stall at that I've got a blank Word document, other services are available, Word document in front of you, and they kind of stall and just don't write anything. Just write some words on a piece of paper. And then when you're not completely terrified about it, give it to somebody else that's probably done before and say, what do you think of this? It's an early idea, but what do you think of it as an idea? And then I'd say my biggest thing about writing grants is to not just go with version 1. I think most grants I submit now, because I increment the version every time we make a bigger change. If it's below about version 18, it's probably not ready to go.
Wow.
And that, like, literally, and even though it's quite a lot of time, it's using text we've got elsewhere, you need to craft it to fit that application. And I think if it's not, for me, if it's not gone through at least a dozen, 20 iterations, it's probably not ready to go to the funder.
Yeah, 3 to 5 bullet points. So let's go with 4. So
Okay.
follow your passion in science. That's really, really important. I think I'm just going to reiterate what Alan said. I think
Be more Alan.
be more Alan. Be an opportunist. So see opportunities when they arise, and that is both for yourself, but also by working with great people. I think build an amazing network of collaborators that you trust, and they will be people that are not like you, so you can build synergies with them. And work at Aston. Okay, that's number 4.
Yeah. So, is there anywhere on social media that people can find you if they would like to collaborate with you or to ask you for any help in the future?
You can find me on X/Twitter. I think it's Alan_Goddard, where I mainly tweet about retweeting other people's science posts in cricket. So if you want to follow
and a bit of darts.
And a bit of darts, yeah.
Yeah.
I am on LinkedIn, but I don't think I've updated my LinkedIn profile in too long. But I'm still at Aston on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. And
the AIM website.
The AIM
We're both on the
yeah.
AIM website, and our email addresses are there.
Yeah.
And I'm on Twitter as well, at Roslyn Bill.
Yeah, and you are very good at reading emails and answer them. So
Yeah,
that's amazing.
old fashioned. I like email.
I like email as
and
well.
I can do my 2-finger typing there. I don't like this. Can't do 2 thumb stuffs on phones. So yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Alan and Roslyn, for accepting this. To be here talking about and helping people developing their expertise in applying for funding into research. I hope this helps someone. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, Carolina.
Cheers.